Hey y'all, this is your host Laura. I had a quick announcement before we begin today's episode. This episode is dedicated to my brother Cameron McCombs. I hope you all enjoy it. Hello and welcome to Homegrown KC, a podcast dedicated to exploring Kansas City's fascinating history and sharing stories from its rich past. I'm your host Laura. Today, this is a very special episode. I am sitting in the Hey Hey Club at the Rieger Distillery, but we'll come back to that. With me is Ryan Maybee, one of the owners.
Hi, I'm Ryan.
So we're going to talk about the story of Rieger's history. But first, what is your story?
Wow, my story, I guess probably starts with my first bartending job at Pierpont's at Union Station. So I've always been in the food and beverage business. I've been in the restaurant business my entire life, starting out as a busser back when I was in high school. Worked in hotels quite a bit, doing room service, but always loved the idea of being a bartender. And so I started bartending when I was 21. And I was lucky enough to land a job on the opening staff of Pierpont's at Union Station in 1999, and that was a really transformative experience. It was a beautiful restaurant with a lot of history in its own right. The resurrected Union Station, which was a really big deal for Kansas City at the time. So I learned a lot, and not just about cocktails and bartending, but about Kansas City history and about everything that comes with the hospitality industry. Is just something I really fell in love with. From that point, I kind of dedicated myself to that, to the industry, knowing that I wanted to own my own bar and restaurant one day. So I got a SOM certification at the age of 23. I went into wine sales very briefly.
Sorry, what is a SOM certificate?
A sommelier. I was a certified sommelier, wine sommelier. So leaned a little bit harder into the wine side of things initially. Opened a bar in the Crossroads back in 2006 called JP Wine Bar and Coffee House. It was one of the earlier pioneering bars down in that neighborhood at the time. Became really successful, and then I moved on 2 years later, parted ways with my business partner there because I wanted to open up Manifesto, which is the little craft cocktail speakeasy in the basement of the old Rieger Hotel, which led to everything here today. So Manifesto I started in 2009. Year and a half later, I partnered with Howard Hanna to open up the Rieger in the old Rieger Hotel building, and that's where I stumbled across the history of J. Rieger and Company. Okay.
And the story about how you restarted the distillery is really cool. Will you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so I mean, in the process of building out the restaurant at the Rieger Hotel, I tried to learn as much about that old building as possible. It was a beautiful building. I figured it had a story to tell. And so just looking for old pictures and anything I could find to build into the concept of the restaurant. In that process, I stumbled onto the history of J. Rieger and Company and the whiskey distillery dating even further back to 1887. So, to that point, I had no idea that there ever was a J. Rieger distillery or even that there was a whiskey distillery at all in Kansas City. And then I come to find out that there was not only a whiskey distillery, but one under the same ownership as the building that I was in and getting ready to open up my business in, and also one that grew to become a really renowned and important part of American whiskey history that died with Prohibition. And so that's when it kind of immediately struck me to resurrect the brand.
Okay. Backtracking real quick. So Manifesto, actually, I have been there.
Yeah.
It was right around the time that we were going into lockdown. Is either like the week before or the week after. Yeah. Back in March 2020.
Yeah.
It's a very cool space.
Yeah.
Your drinks, are they Prohibition inspired as well, or are they more modern?
I would say everything, that I've done from Manifesto forward to today is always inspired by classic cocktails. I mean, cocktails were an American innovation dating back to the early to mid 1800s. The cocktail really was invented in the United States. And most of the cocktails that we know as classics today were created and existed with great popularity up before Prohibition. The 14 years of Prohibition actually killed the bartending profession at the time. and we lost, most of that old style of making drinks. And so, since 2009 when I opened Manifesto, that was kind of in the early days of this whole modern cocktail renaissance. And so very much inspired by pre-Prohibition era cocktails, that same kind of fundamental approach to making classic drinks using good ingredients, fresh ingredients, proper measurements and techniques, all that stuff. But then also, it's a kind of a platform for being creative, and that's one of the things that drew me into it as well, is that you can take those old established drinks and recipes and techniques that work and elaborate on them and come up with something that's new and original.
Okay. So do you have a favorite cocktail, just out of curiosity?
No, I can't really pick one. I mean, I can. It might change tomorrow.
Right.
There's always a handful, a few that jump out at me that have real meaning to me. That those would be the Sazerac, the Daiquiri, maybe a gin martini, but so many more. It's really hard to pick one.
Yeah. All right. So we are in a very cool building, and it has its own history. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, we're in the bottling facility, or the former bottling facility for the Heim Brewing Company. And Heim Beer was very similar to J. Rieger and Company, founded right around the same time in the late 1880s. And just like J. Rieger and Company, grew to become a really big, nationally renowned brand that was one of the largest breweries in the country. And so this building was built in 1900, opened in 1900, as just the bottling facility. The brewery was just a few hundred yards away, and there are still to this day tunnels that connect the two buildings underground, and that's how they would transport the beer from their brewery into this building, where it would be pasteurized, bottled, and then shipped right out the front door, right onto the railroad tracks. You might notice we're right on the edge of the tracks here.
I was wondering if they did that, if they just put it right there on the track.
Yeah, I mean that was the entire purpose, for ease of shipping around the country, and it was a huge booming business that led the Heim family to develop this whole neighborhood down here. And just like J. Rieger and Company, they went out of business with Prohibition in 1919, never to be heard from since. And so we brought this building back to life, and also in that process brought back Heim Beer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, so when we were doing the tour, nothing was mentioned about Heim Beer.
The main, mainly we don't make the beer on site. We resurrected the name and the brand. We resurrected the what we could get as close to as we possibly could with the recipe. We knew that it was a German lager. They had an award-winning German lager. That's what they were most known for. So we worked with KC Beer Co. here in Kansas City, which is they make primarily German-style beers, and they did a lot of research into where the Heim family came from, and then tried to replicate what they believe would have been that style of beer from back in the late 1800s. And it's only available to us here at the distillery. We pour it on draft here, so if you do come down here, you can get a beer, but only one. It's Heim.
That's very cool, though.
Yeah.
All right, so backtrack again. How did Joseph Rieger, how did he start the brewery?
Jacob Rieger.
Oh, sorry. My notes are totally wrong.
That's all right.
Okay.
Well, Jacob Rieger immigrated here from Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1877, eventually landing here in Kansas City, Missouri in, I believe, 1881. And that time was really interesting. Kansas City's history is very much intertwined with the history of Prohibition in a number of ways. But one way, in that 1881, that was when the state of Kansas went completely dry. And they did that. They were the first state in the country to ban alcohol statewide, a full 38 years before federal prohibition. And with the proximity here in Kansas City of, you've got the state line running right through the heart of the West Bottoms, where the city was springing up. People just flooded across the state line onto the Missouri side, and that area blew up with gambling halls and saloons and brothels and a distillery. It became known as the wettest block in the world in the 1880s. And so Jacob Rieger's distillery was one of the beneficiaries of that movement. And, that combined with, I think, a good quality product and being at the Midwestern hub of traveling across the United States. There was a big westward, expansion at the time. People were traveling west. They had to come through Kansas City, and it made it pretty easy to pick up a bottle of booze on your way out there. So it helped spread the brand nationwide.
You were talking about the state line. It made me think of Have you heard of the State Line Tavern?
Yes, I have. And there's a new one that's just opening up in that same area as well.
Oh, is there?
Yeah,
I don't think I've seen that.
Yeah, Ninth and State Line down there as well. It just opened.
Very cool. Well, so listeners, if you listen to my Prohibition series, you'll know what it is. If not, during Prohibition, we had all these taverns and speakeasies. There's one called State Line, and it literally straddled the state lines. So whenever someone came to bust them, they'd be like, "Oh, it's okay. We're all on the Kansas side. We're all on the Missouri side."
That one, I believe, was on Southwest Boulevard, right? Not necessarily in the West Bottoms. I could be.
I don't remember its exact location.
I think that one was on Southwest Boulevard, where if you're heading southwest down Southwest Boulevard, eventually you're going to, at some point, you cross
State Line.
Yeah, into the Kansas side, and I think that's where that tavern existed, if I remember right.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
All right, so Prohibition, as you've said a couple times, killed the breweries. And what happened to the family during that time?
Well, the Rieger family, Alexander Rieger, Jacob's son, had taken over the business by that point and built the Rieger Hotel. That was part of his expansion of the company. And at that point, J. Rieger and Company was already established as a national brand. We were known as the largest mail-order whiskey house in the U.S. Mm-hmm. So we were doing very, very well. I think that he probably suspected that Prohibition was coming. I think that the writing was more or less on the wall. Mm-hmm. He had already started to get into banking and real estate. Prior to that, he was running a trust company out of the distillery down in the West Bottoms, and so he shifted pretty much into banking almost immediately. Prohibition put J. Rieger & Co. out of business. Then he sold the hotel building 1 year later. It changed names, and then the Rieger family got into banking. They eventually started Mercantile Bank, which became a very well-known Midwestern bank chain, mm-hmm. and the family continued down that path after Prohibition.
Okay, and do you have a theory? Or maybe your partner, Andy, does he know, from family lore, why they didn't restart after the end of Prohibition?
I don't know that there's any documentation on that exactly. And if it was even handed down in any forms, it wasn't. I mean, I know for a fact that the trademark expired in 1922, and it was still sitting there available when I stumbled onto the history of it all the way in 2010.
I'm sure that made it much easier for you to restart.
Yeah, I mean, from a legal perspective, no one owned the rights to it, so it was just a matter of registering it, mm-hmm. And the original trademark was still available. It expired in 1922, and no one had touched it since. My assumption, I would assume, Andy probably thinks something similar, that I think they just became so successful in banking and their other ventures that 14 years later, Prohibition was enacted for 14 years. Maybe there just wasn't a need or a desire to bring it back at that point.
So it was 2014 that you reopened.
That's correct.
But it was 2010 when you really started working on how to reopen it.
Yeah.
So what was that process like?
Well, it was kind of intertwined with the Rieger restaurant. That's where I stumbled onto the history of it. So we opened the restaurant. I met Andy Rieger right at that time. Started talking. I pitched the idea to him initially in December of 2010 of bringing back his family's whiskey distillery. And at the time, he wasn't interested. He was living in Dallas, Texas. And I kept working on it. I kept, putting together a rough business plan and outline for how to bring it back, all the while still, running a new restaurant and mm-hmm. manifesto, which was,
only a year old.
Yeah, and busy, and running a restaurant, owning a restaurant is no easy task. Mm-hmm. But about a year later, I never let go of that idea. I was going to do it one way or another. So about a year later, I called Andy back up and I said, "Hey, remember me?" And I threw it out at him again, and I met up with him for lunch. He came back up to Kansas City from Dallas for Christmas that year. And we actually had lunch on Christmas Eve, and I put a rough outline for the business plan in front of him. And I said, "Look, I'm going to do this, one way or another, but I really feel like you should be involved." Mm-hmm. I mean, it's his family, it's his name, it's his legacy. And at that point, he started to listen a little bit more. still didn't say yes immediately. But after, you got to remember he didn't have any background personally in the spirits industry or in hospitality
Right.
like I did or anything like that. So once he started to learn a little bit more about my vision for it, my connections in the industry, and realizing that there's an opportunity here to do this in a very legit way, I think he started to get more and more interested. And so eventually it was probably around late 2012 that he officially said, yeah, let's do this. And then we started, things really kind of ramped up at that point.
And did you open in this location immediately?
We did, in the warehouse connected to this building, where we now have our rick house. That's where we started our production in the first place. We didn't have this building, the Heim building, initially, but we always kind of, we had our eye on it, thinking that, someday in the future we might need to expand and would love to own this building. That day came a lot sooner than I think either of us expected. But yeah, initially we were just in that little concrete warehouse.
Okay, so for those who have not had the benefit of the tour, can you describe what a rick house is?
Rick house is really just a place where you age your barrels of whiskey. That's the simple definition of it. When we first started in 2014, is where we did everything in that building. We had our stills and fermenters, and we bottled in there and everything, and shipped out of there, and then also stored our barrels there, which at the time weren't many. I mean, when we first started, we started with like 40 barrels just laying on the floor. Now, if you walk through there, it's bursting at the seams. We have over 4,000 barrels of whiskey aging on site, and we keep adding to that number every single day. And so we filled it, it filled up quick, and we ended up moving all of our production into this building here. And now that building is really a dedicated rick house.
Yeah. Was it Mike you said? The tour guide?
The tour guide, yes.
He was saying that your limit is 5,000. So you're about to open up a new building so you can house more. And then
we recently purchased a new building just around the corner from here as a secondary aging facility because, we're running out of room. And that new building should give us storage space for another 5,000 barrels on top of what we have here.
He was also saying that you get over 200 bottles per barrel. So you have like almost 1 million bottles worth in your building right now.
I think honestly, 200 is probably a little low on the low end of that estimate. It depends on a number of factors. It depends on what proof you bottle it at. That's going to affect the yield out of each barrel. It depends on how long it stays in the barrel. Because there is evaporation year over year, and so there's loss that's known as the angel share that you take on every year, and it's the price you pay for aging whiskey longer and maybe having a more delicious and unique product. I would say that number's it's going to be probably 200 bottles on the low end and a bit higher in some cases.
So we brew whiskey here, obviously, but you brew some other things too.
We also make vodka. We make a gin. We have an Amaro that we make with cold brew coffee, which is really beautiful. But then we're mostly a whiskey brand. Looking back at the history of our company, known as the largest mail order whiskey house in the U.S. We did a lot of whiskey, and so that's probably the biggest part of our identity. But I wouldn't sleep on the other products, and the vodka is really, really, really good. And the gin is world class. We partnered with the former master distiller Tanqueray to formulate and create our gin, and he's a partner in the company and an icon and legend in our industry. And we wanted to make the best possible London Dry style gin made in the United States, and that's really what we've done with our gin. So I think our gin could have a really, really big impact. And then the Cafe Amaro is just a really unique, special product that, while it's not ever going to be like a booming sales volume leader just because of the nature of what it is, it's got a really special place for it in the industry, and bartenders love it. It's very versatile in cocktails, and it's really been making some waves and getting lots of good press and reviews, and it's something that means a lot to us. And then our head distiller, Nathan Perry, he's a gem, and he gets to experiment with whatever he wants to do, and who knows what we might come up with next. I don't think we're going to keep cranking out new and different products every year. At some point, you got to really focus on what you're best at, what you're good at, and try not to get spread too thin or too distracted. But at the same time, creativity is what fuels a brand like ours and a company like ours. And so if we can be creative and innovative and come up with something that is really powerful, you never know what it might be and when we might add something to the lineup.
So that was actually going to be my next question. Do you have another in mind in the next few years? But it sounds like no.
Not really. I mean, the main thing we're focused on right now is growing the brands that we have because we really believe in them. We know how good they are. And adding to the whiskey lineup. And so we just released our straight rye bottled and bond this year. We only did 1,000 cases and it was incredible. It was very well received. We'll be adding to that lineup next year with our straight bourbon bottled and bond. And then we'll be producing both of those every single year. So in addition to our Kansas City whiskey, which is what people know from us the most, we will then every year have straight bourbon bottled and bond and a straight rye bottled and bond, and those will become permanent fixtures in our whole collection.
Very cool. So the Kansas City specific is very special. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So the Kansas City whiskey is something that we. In resurrecting this old brand, we really wanted to do something that paid tribute to the history of the company and the history of American whiskey. And so we did a lot of research into trying to figure out what we were making back then. And that's, there's really no exact documentation of what that is for a number of reasons, because first off, there were no rules, laws, or federal regulations around whiskey production back then or labeling or anything like that. And so it was quite literally the wild, wild west. And so there's no, documentation, no permits, no licenses that says, oh yeah, this is what you were making and how it was made. But what I did learn was that there was, aside from bourbon and rye, there was a vast sea of other American whiskeys that were being produced that have long since been forgotten due to prohibition. And the one that jumped out at me the most was the fact that distillers and producers back then were adding sherry to their whiskey, and that was a very common thing to do. And I also believe that's something that we were doing. I know for a fact that we were importing sherry at the time. And so that's the route we decided to go with our whiskey. So what's actually in the bottle is a blend of 4 different whiskeys. There's 2 bourbons, a 5-year and an 8-year. There's a 5-year-old straight rye. There's a 12-year-old light corn whiskey. And then we add just 2% of a 15-year-old Oloroso sherry to that blend. And that is what makes up the recipe for the Kansas City whiskey. And so it's very much unique and proprietary and one of a kind. And by today's standards, no one else is doing that. The practice of adding sherry has been long since forgotten. And so we're proud to bring that back. And then the federal government also granted us permission to classify it as Kansas City whiskey. And that's why you see Kansas City whiskey on the label as a style. And not just a notation of where it's coming from, but it's actually a reference to what's in the bottle.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And Will was bragging on you a little bit. He said this is one of maybe 5 companies where you can import sherry en masse, which is not typical.
No, in fact it's very, very hard to do that. It took us a few years to get the everything worked out with the Spanish government so that we could do that. In the beginning, we were bringing it in by the bottle. And Andy and I were...
Such a long, tedious process.
Fond memories, though. But like every time we'd mix up a 750-gallon batch of Kansas City whiskey, we're popping, well over 100 bottles of sherry by hand and adding it to the blend. So it was weird. I think a lot of people looked at us like, what the hell are these guys doing? But it was, it's special. And it's our story.
Okay, so you have your facility and you have all your awesome whiskeys. Actually, real quick, different question. I was curious, so you aged the whiskey. So when you opened, you didn't have any ready, or did you?
We had to source it, which is also a common practice. We were buying barrels of whiskey from other producers, other distilleries that were already fully matured and ready to go.
Okay.
And so we formulated the Kansas City whiskey blend using those whiskeys.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's not uncommon. It's something that you see all the time. It's also something that, for whatever reason, there are some brands out there that will practice that will do it, but they'll try and hide it from the consumer, which I think is a huge mistake. And some brands have got caught in that and it's caused them a lot of trouble. It's also caused it's kind of planted the seed of a lot of confusion in our industry around how that's done and why that's done. When in fact it's a practice that's been around for hundreds of years. It's still widely used in Scotch production and in the Caribbean for rums. It's just a normal part of the business. I mean, making a good barrel of whiskey takes 5-6 years, maybe 4 if you're pushing it. But if you're a startup business and your goal is to establish yourself as a whiskey producer, and it's a lot to ask to invest money and time and energy into something that's going to take 5 years before you see a dime of cash flow. So yeah, you start out by sourcing barrels. We start out by sourcing barrels from other producers, purchasing them in bulk or relative bulk, and then blending them together or creating our recipe. Now it would have been very, very easy for us to just buy barrels of straight bourbon and take that barrel made by somebody else, put it in a bottle with our label on it, and put it out there to the world. That's a common practice. It happens all the time. It's how many, many brands start out. Bullet started that way. Angel's Envy started that way. High West started that way. It's very, very normal. What we did that was a little different was, instead of just taking one whiskey and putting it in our bottle with our label on it, we created our own proprietary blend and proprietary recipe. And that's where utilizing those different styles of whiskey, blending bourbon with rye and the light corn whiskey, but then really the kicker being the addition of that sherry is what, made it so wildly different from what anyone else was doing.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So then that means that your first, I made this was 2015, 2016?
We produced it in 2015. We fired up our stills for the first time in 2015, but that product that we made in 2015 literally just hit store shelves 2 months ago.
Okay. Well,
6 years later.
That's pretty awesome. That's good timing on my part.
And that was our straight rye. The straight rye bottled in bond. That's the first whiskey that we made here from grain and have been waiting all these years to unleash on the world.
That must have been really exciting for you guys.
It was really exciting. It's the next chapter in our story, putting our own whiskey out there. It was really cool.
And like I've said before, you have a beautiful facility. You offer tours. You offer wine tastings. We have the Hey Club here. Did this open the same time you opened the building?
Just a couple months later. We opened the building to the public in July of 2019, and then I believe we kicked off the Hey Club in September of that year.
And is it like Manifesto? You can just come, or is this for private events?
It is very much like Manifesto in the way that we run it, in that you can book reservations online. Those are available. Or you can just show up down here at the distillery, and if there's room, we try to get as many people in as possible. But the size of the space is about the same as Manifesto was, maybe just a tiny, maybe 5% bigger.
Really? It feels a lot bigger than Manifesto.
No, well, part of it is because the furniture at Manifesto was very tight. Everything was very compact, but we jammed a lot of people in there. Here we have it's a little bit more luxurious. We've got plush leather couches and big chairs, and so you got a little bit more elbow room.
Okay.
About the same seating capacity.
Okay. And you also have a beautiful little exhibit space upstairs, so I'm gonna have photos for that, listeners. And you just opened, I think it was this summer, was it? The electric park?
Yeah, we just opened it not even a month ago. Right at the mid-September, a little over a month ago. And
can you talk about the inspiration for that?
So the inspiration was Electric Park, the amusement park built by the Heims back in 1899, 1900, that became really well known as one of the first electrically powered amusement parks around the country. It had a roller coaster, and it had a theater with live music and all kinds of games. It had a beer garden, one of the first places in the country that actually had draft beer with beer piped from underground from the brewery right into the beer garden. An alligator farm. It was wild. The Heims, I talk about how they were kind of esoteric, in that they just did all these kind of crazy things. They had their own fire department. They owned the first professional baseball team ever in Kansas City was owned by the Heim family. So they just did a lot of really unique, interesting things. And our outdoor bar I think every bar in this facility, you know, from the Hey Hey Club to the Monogram Lounge to the Electric Park Garden Bar, I mean, everything has its own unique identity and personality. And that one really tries to embrace the kind of quirky, fun, lighthearted side of it that you might have experienced at Electric Park.
Cool. Yeah, I love how you're incorporating so much of Kansas City history into this.
It's all part of it. Yeah, it's kind of far-reaching. You know, honestly, when it comes to Kansas City history, there's so much of it to be told, and there's so much in our story. I mean, from the J. Rieger story to the Heim family and Electric Park and all that. But it all connects with, you know, the history of Prohibition and the growth of Kansas City, and it means a lot to us to be able to bring back not only these brands but this place, and to be able to tell these stories again.
And what are you doing in the company now? You mentioned earlier that you travel a lot.
I travel quite a bit. I traveled a lot more before COVID, obviously.
Of course.
But yeah, my travel is mostly to promote the brand in other markets. So we're distributed in about 25 states across the country, and so I work with our distributors, trying to grow the brand and that presence there. I do a lot of education. I do guest bartending, trade events, industry events, that kind of stuff. And then here in the building here in KC, I try to help out wherever I can, just overseeing the day-to-day on the hospitality side of things and trying to make sure that we're providing an experience here that can live up to our standards and I think the reputation that people have come to know us for. So my title is Managing Director, just in general, which is kind of, you know,
very vague.
Ambiguous, but yeah, kind of like to keep it that way.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really all I had prepared. Is there anything else you wanted to tell us about?
No, nothing. I think we covered a lot of ground. I would say just, you know, we are just slightly, barely off the beaten path.
Yeah, a little bit.
City. We're in what might feel like a kind of removed part of the city. It's just slightly disconnected, but it's very close. I mean, you just go to the River Market and hang a right down 3rd Street and you run right into us. You know, we're in this little pocket of Kansas City that not a lot of people know of. Used to be, for a long, long time, people that did know about it, we call it the East Bottoms. But we're very much trying to rebrand it as Electric Park, both as a means to tell that history and also make it a little bit more of an exciting and intriguing destination for people to come to. So I would just encourage people to kind of make that little extra effort to come down here, and they won't be disappointed.
I've never been clear. Is this considered a part of North KC or no?
No. This is a part of Kansas City, Missouri, proper, Jackson County. We are in what would be called Kansas City, Missouri.
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, no, we're on the river, and so North Kansas City is like just
on the other side of the river.
Just a stone's throw away.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That'll be it. Thank you for listening. Cheers. I am so thankful that I got to sit down with Ryan today. Such a cool history, the Rieger Distillery, and it touches on so many other things in Kansas City history. The facility is really cool. The tour was great. Highly recommend it. Make sure to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Twitter. I'm Homegrown KC on all of those platforms. Rate and review me on Apple Podcasts. The more ratings and reviews I get, the higher up in the charts I go, and then it's easier for other people to find me. For more information, you can visit my website. That's homegrownkc.wordpress.com. If you want some cool merchandise, go to Zazzle, ZAZZLE.com/store/homegrown_KC_store. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, episode suggestions, please email me at homegrownkcpodcast@gmail.com. This is a special Patreon episode which I'm making available to the general public for 2 months only, so for the rest of this year. January 1st, it will go back to being a Patreon exclusive episode, so listen to it while you can. I hope that you'll consider becoming a Patreon supporter. Sign up at patreon.com/homegrownkc or redcircle.com/homegrownkc. It's $5 a month. You get charged on the 1st of every month. Everything you give goes back into the show, pays for gas mostly as I drive around seeing all these historic sites and visiting the library. You get an item from the merchandise store valued at $5 or less, a shout out on each show, so let me do that now. Thank you, Bjorn and Joan, for your continued support, and you get exclusive access to bonus episodes such as this one. Thanks goes out to my talented sister-in-law, Sarah McCombs, who created my logo, to the Dear Misses for the use of their song Kansas City as the intro and outro music of the show, and a special thank you to everyone at the Rieger Museum. Cheers!
Seem to shake this feeling, and I can't seem to get you off my mind. Thought love